Hi, this is Ryan from Generational Talk. If you like children's programming from the 80s, 90s, 2000s, and 2010s, then this episode is for you.
Hey, I'm Adam Casey. I'll be 38 this June. My favorite cartoons growing up was probably G.I. Joe. But the one I made my folks tape for me when I went to visit my aunt when I was 5 was Silverhawks.
My name is Thomas Fortuna, or Tommy Fortuna, and my favorite cartoon was Magic School Bus, and it's my favorite because that's basically the only cartoon I watched. So I don't really know any other cartoon shows, and I'm 31. And seriously though, my appeal to Magic School Bus was because of its scientific orientation, and I always had a thirst for knowledge, and that was something that appealed to me as a kid, and I didn't really see that in many other cartoons at the time. So
We're going to have to unpack that in future episodes. Have you seen My Childhood by Michael Jackson?
I'm Chaz Andrews. I'm 32, and my favorite cartoons when I was growing up were Digimon. I was a little probably on the older side of it, but I liked it for its character, the breadth of characters that they had, and their interactions and their development over the time, and also Scooby-Doo. I liked the mystery aspect of it. I was a lover of mysteries from a young age, and that just fed into it.
I'm Chris Baker. I'm a filmmaker. I'm 38, so I'm on the upper end of this millennial generation, like Ryan. My favorite cartoon was probably Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Whenever I was 7 years old, I got my first Ninja Turtle toy, and something about that, which bonkers idea of Ninja Turtles, got stuck in my brain, and so I loved it just for how weird that idea was, I suppose. But I watched all the Saturday morning cartoons, the Disney afternoon, Tailspin, DuckTales, all that stuff. But probably Ninja Turtles just because they were more important to me than He-Man and G.I. Joe was a few years earlier.
My name is Darius. I'm 25 years old. My favorite cartoon growing up was probably Avatar: The Last Airbender, which came out in 2005 on Nickelodeon. It was my favorite cartoon just because, unlike a lot of stuff, it wasn't completely episodic. It had some episodes that, here and there, but I just like to focus on the characters. I thought the world building in it was way more detailed than pretty much anything I had seen up to that point. And even coming back and watching it as an adult, there's still a lot of things in it that I'm either catching or I'm better able to relate to the older characters in the show. So I think it holds up really well.
So Batman animated series is definitely my top favorite because I felt like it was the one that didn't treat us like kids. It was the closest to the comic book that I collected. So I mentioned that because it's definitely the ultimate favorite, but I'm going to go back to when I was a kid watching Muppet Babies. I think that's the one that started my obsession. I didn't go to karate class on Saturday mornings because it was scheduled during the time that Muppet Babies was on. We didn't have DVR then. We didn't have episodes on YouTube or social media. We still don't have episodes of Muppet Babies on streaming. I can't, is it on Amazon? Where is it?
It's because of all the rights issues, I think, because they showed so many old movies and played old songs. I think that's the problem. That's why it's not on Disney Plus.
And I do know that they used to run forever on Nick Jr. because that's how I see it.
But that's why I didn't want to miss it, because I knew that in 2020 rights issues would have prevented from being aired, streaming for all of us to see. So whoever is watching this, please just get over the business part and let us see it. All right.
That was awesome. I think that was a good point you mentioned about Batman and its appeal to you was that you didn't feel like it was treating the audience like they were children. One of the things that I felt like I picked up on as a child is that I felt like these things were clearly targeted towards children and treating them as children. And I always wanted to be an adult and be seen as, older than I was. And so I think that was one of the things that was like, I'm not that cartoon stuff is I'm above that. And so I think that might have played into why I didn't get into cartoons that much. And I wonder if I had seen Batman, that maybe that would have been a cartoon that appealed to me if it didn't have that, if I didn't get that vibe from it when I was watching it. So I was looking up, it looks like, I'm like, obviously MTV started at around the beginning of the 80s. And I was just wondering how the rise of the cable channels that were specifically geared towards children and the youth, how do we think that impacted our development? Like, for instance, I noticed that Nicktoons started at the beginning of the 1990s, which was Nickelodeon's original animated programs. And so I was just wondering, how do we think that might have impacted us being, the first generation to grow up with, channels devoted to entertaining us?
In the early 90s, where they just showed a lot of old cartoons, like Disney had their cartoons from the 30s and the 40s. Hanna-Barbera on Cartoon Network had their old cartoons from the 50s and 60s, and that was like a good cartoon education for the earlier half of the millennial generation, I would say. It isn't really until you start getting to like the mid 90s that you start seeing original cartoons pop up. And then they don't really...
I appreciate those Hanna-Barbera cartoons because I felt like they created a connection between me and my parents, who are baby boomers.
Right.
So, and it also, I just feel like with the arrival of cable, it kind of gave us access to cartoons from every era, like from Popeye. I remember Popeye. So
Yeah. To that point, when I was like 4 or 5 years old, I would always go over to my grandparents on the weekend, and of course we'd sit there and watch like Tom and Jerry or something. Like they even had, today would be like the Tom and Jerry merch. They had like a glass and all this other stuff. So yeah, I'd say that was good for connecting across generations.
I didn't have cable until I was, I guess this would have been like 1991, 92, maybe. And so my grandparents had satellite, and my aunt, when I would go visit her for the summer, she lived in Wilmington, she had cable. And so I actually that's the first time I saw Nickelodeon, as well as like Nick at Night, which with like old like Dobie Gillis and like Car 54, Where Are You, and all that kind of stuff like that. Cable, I think you were right about it had hours to fill. And so they just went back to the stuff that was already made, ready to go. And then kids are seeing stuff as if it's brand new to them, I think it still sort of happens today with kids. I have friends who have children, and they're like, "Hey, Dad, have you heard about this show called He-Man?" Like,
and I didn't even have cable growing up. I just my parents got lucky because my grandmother died shortly after I was born, and they used basically some of the money for that to invest in those big gigantic satellite dishes, like the lawn ornament.
That's what my grandparents
that's what we had.
I'm glad you guys brought that up, because obviously that would also be another thing that would fluctuate across generations, is who had cable and who didn't when it first came out.
1990s, when I remember having cable, we had Nickelodeon, which had a lot of the Canadian programs. We had So the later wave had all that. We had You Can't Do That on Television.
Which is where Nickelodeon Slime comes from. It's not even an original thing from Nickelodeon.
Yeah. That's what I called as a kid when I said, I want to watch Nickelodeon. What I meant was You Can't Do That on Television. For some reason, I equated Nickelodeon with that show. That was it was the same thing. There was no name of a network, name of a show. Nickelodeon was the Slime Show, which I didn't even know was Canadian until 10 years ago.
And crude humor was welcomed. It was like, it wasn't like kids shouldn't say such things. Kids shouldn't do such things. It was like, be a kid. I love that. So,
which is sort of a good dichotomy with the old school cartoons that we're watching at this time. The old 60s Hanna-Barbera cartoons, or even Looney Tunes, Mickey Mouse. Like there's something very innocent about that. And then we're watching this kid show, You Can't Do That on Television, where kids can be crude. So you have this weird generational difference there, right?
So, if in case there's anybody who's watching this that's as ignorant as I am, the perception, I've never heard of this show before. The perception I'm
I've never
getting.
heard of it.
Okay, the
Oh,
perception,
Yeah.
was this
No.
kind of like the Jackass equivalent, but for children or something like that?
No, it's like Saturday Night Live, but for kids. Like
Yeah.
how all that
Yeah.
was in the 90s, but it was
Okay.
Canadian, and it was very sort of like after school kind of vibe. So it's
Yeah.
like,
Okay.
aren't teachers terrible? And isn't this smelly, cafeteria
Okay.
worker?
Yeah.
Isn't he a jerk? And this, that, and the other.
Yeah. There was
Yeah.
only one
Okay.
adult.
Lots of like recurring gags, and if you said I don't know, you got slimed. If you said water would fall on you, and so there's a lot of like real sort of like breaking character where like somebody doesn't realize that they just said I don't know, and then they're getting slimed, and it's a genuine reaction. It's not not staged a lot of the time. So
Okay.
And
What was this?
It ran for like I think like maybe 300 episodes,
I was
200
going to say
episodes.
that. And it was
Was this live or cartoon?
It was live action, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it was
So
a
this wasn't okay.
Alanis Morissette.
It was a
was on.
precursor to all that. Is the best way to describe it, Darius.
Okay.
Okay.
And so like there was
Okay.
people actually getting slimed.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Alanis Morissette started out on that
Oh.
show. Yeah.
Oh geez. Okay.
Okay. We just had like Slime Time live. Like I went to Disney World when I was a kid, and we were at one of the filmings for it. And so I guess this was the beginning of that.
Yes. I think it was their
Sliming had been around.
flagship.
This is that show in the mid '80s, yeah. And then as Nickelodeon, as the brand of the network evolved, you had the orange logo, and then you had slime, and it was everywhere. The Paramount theme parks, which were Carowinds, Kings Island, and Kings Dominion, had Nickelodeon areas in them, and we had all kind of like SpongeBob stuff, whatever, but also like slime things.
Eventually, it turned into Universal Studios Florida, though.
Yeah.
'cause-
Right, yeah.
That's where I went.
In the late '90s, it was with the Paramount parks, but yeah.
Which is also what's also interesting is with the Disney Channel, they brought back the Mickey Mouse Club. If we're talking about like having parallels with our parents' generation, we also got the return of the Mickey Mouse Club. And from that's where Britney Spears, Justin Timberlake, Ryan Reynolds,
Gosling.
Ryan Reynolds was on the
Kerry
Nickelodeon
Russell.
15, which was a teen drama, but Canadian produced in the early '90s. Yeah.
Was David the Gnome Canadian produced too?
David Gnome, I believe, is French.
Okay.
Yeah.
Or is it French Canadian?
Possibly.
French Canadian.
That's the thing. A lot of the Nickelodeon stuff was co-productions between America and a lot of it's France, but some of it is Canada as well.
Like Are You Afraid of the Dark was definitely Canadian.
All Canadian, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And Afraid of the Dark, I think that's another one that didn't try to dumb things down for kids because that show was crazy.
Right.
The later seasons that I didn't really see much of got a little bit more sanitized, but like the earlier stuff, yeah.
I remember TV Guide had a write-up about it, and it said for parents, like, if your kids should watch it, you should ask them, are they afraid of the dark? And if they are, they shouldn't be watching this show because it's scary.
Yeah.
This brings me to Disney, not just like the TV shows, but the movies, and how I feel like before we really started to get into, at least my wave, started to really get into the Disney Renaissance, we had the Black Cauldron, which came out. Chaz, this is you.
Yeah.
Like the Black Cauldron.
My favorite Disney film, yes.
And I feel like that wasn't a big hit for Disney. You could pretty much go on why that wasn't a big hit for them. And they had to pivot away from that format to something that was more kid-friendly. So before we get into that, let's go back to what Disney was before the Renaissance.
Before the Renaissance, or are we talking during the Renaissance?
I would say before. Let's set up the need for the Renaissance. Why do you think that
the need for the Renaissance really comes from the fact that, let's just start with when Walt died in '66, if I remember correctly off the top of my head.
Yeah.
Basically, think of what the animation studio from that point forward kind of gets frozen in time with the whole sort of, would Walt have done this? What would Walt do? And the animation department really starts to get focused on less and less, more emphasis on the live action stuff that they were producing at the time. And a lot of times with the animation that was coming out, in that era, they were reusing frames. I mean, this famous YouTube video is up where they show in the 1973 Robin Hood, where they reused frames from the Jungle Book to animate in Robin Hood, as well as reused frames from Snow White. And that really that kind of gets into the setup for Don Bluth, who was animating in Disney at this time. He was kind of getting upset, like he would get all excited, like, oh, how did Disney used to do this stuff back in the 30s and the 40s that he got excited and made him want to become an animator? And they're like, we forgot. I mean, we used to do it, but it's been many, many years since then. So there was kind of like a lot of people call it the Dark Age, but you could say that, yeah.
So was the Black Cauldron them trying to be gritty and step into the 80s, or just them running out of ideas? I've never seen it, so don't hate on me. I've never seen it. It's just it's not on my radar.
I've never heard of it. So
it's based on a trilogy, well, not trilogy, a 5-book series written in the 60s by an American author, Lloyd Alexander, which is loosely based off of Welsh mythology. Okay. Very loosely, I will say. The film kind of squeezes together the first 2 books into one film, and that usually is when people start critiquing the film. That's where they start, is that, it tries to do 2 plots at once and make them into one film. And there's other parts where the Black Cauldron really does use of, if I remember correctly, 3D animation when everything is getting sucked into the cauldron towards the end of the film.
Was it like the Lord of the Rings? I remember there was an old Lord of the Rings.
It was like the Lord of the Rings, but if you didn't edit out The Hobbit.
Okay.
Let's put it that way. And Disney kind of amplified up the Hobbit-esque nature of the Black Cauldron.
Chris, Adam, have you seen it?
In the book.
So I've never seen it. I've read the book, or I read one of the books in 5th grade. And I think should be, oh God, 5th grade. I can't remember which one it was. But I think there should be mention of the villain, the Horned King, yes. Right? Like this is one of the scariest villains that Disney had animated since the demon at the end of Fantasia, or
the evil queen of Snow White.
But this is basically a villain who has no eyes, right? He's got like a skull-like face,
red dots for eyes,
antlers. Yeah. So compared to what Disney had been churning out, this was for the audience at the time, super dark and not what the Disney brand was usually associated with.
Look at the villain's goal, which is necromancy, bringing dead soldiers back to life to fight in an army of deathless warriors.
I remember when Maleficent in the 1959 Sleeping Beauty said hell, and all the powers of hell, and she turned into a dragon. I thought that was pushing it. So how does this compare to that?
Oh, this is going much darker.
Okay.
And then it would swing from a really dark villain and a really gritty atmosphere around the Horned King and everything to a very light and fluffy fairy realm, which was taking it was kind of swinging to the extremes in both ends.
And then we go from that to Basil. Was it the Mouse Detective? Am I saying that right?
The Great Mouse Detective.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like that's definitely still the Dark Age. I feel like that's lost in the desert.
It was more popular, but you could tell it was building off of some of the stuff that Disney had been doing in the Dark Ages, which was a lot of like anthropomorphized mice stories. I mean, you had the Rescuers, the Great Mouse Detective, and such.
Okay. It's a franchise.
So it was a lot of anthropomorphized mice.
So Charles, you've seen Black Cauldron. Do you think it's related to anything to like Wizards and like the other sort of darker animation that was going on like in the late 70s? Do you think that's a reaction to that?
I would definitely say that. It's definitely trying to emulate Bashki's Lord of the Rings and Hobbit films, definitely.
I
There's
was just curious. You guys were saying about like how dark some of the scenes were when they were dealing with the villain, and I was wondering like how that compares to like because I'm thinking like in Aladdin and The Lion King. I'm like the scenes were for a child, pretty dark, I guess, with Scar and with the
Mufasa.
in Aladdin. Well, in
Jafar.
Aladdin,
Uh,
Jafar.
Jafar.
Yes, yeah. So I
Mhm.
mean, like, are those like the Black Cauldron was like a much darker than those scenes, like when
It,
Jafar takes over the kingdom.
it seems like it's a black and white villain. Like just like this is the bad guy. We don't really care if you like
Okay.
him or not. But the villains from our childhood, from the early Disney Renaissance, I remember there were some moments I were like, wow, they're cool. Ursula got the best song in Little Mermaid, in my
and
opinion.
a lot of that comes from the fact that in the Black Cauldron film, they're squishing two villains into
Okay,
one person.
okay.
They're squishing together the actual Horned King, who in the books, if I recall correctly, having read them,
Mhm.
doesn't say a word.
See,
You
now I
never
need to
see
watch
anything.
this because the Dark
And
Side of Ryan really likes the villain in the movies.
oh yeah, the reason to watch the Black Cauldron is for the villain.
Okay.
That is,
And
that
that's
is
kind
the
of an interesting thing of the '80s, though. I think the villains become interesting characters starting in the '80s. I think people like Cobra Commander, people like Mum-Ra, people like Shredder and Krang,
Right.
and that
Skeletor.
like that. Whereas even just in the '70s, like I mean, maybe you cared about I can't even think of really any, but I guess Gargamel. Before then, nobody really liked Gargamel. Nobody really liked
That's-
whoever the Wacky Racers bad guy was, Dastardly. Dick Dastardly, yeah. Nobody like, oh, I love Dick Dastardly. Nobody, no. But like, starting in the '80s, villains become cool.
Thundercats was best when Mun-Ra came
I
on.
mean, this is a villain voiced by John Hurt.
Oh wow. Okay.
So, and he puts in a good performance
Mhm.
as a voice actor.
That's a
So,
random question. The Secret of Nim, when was that? Because we read the book for that when I think I was in 5th grade.
That's
82?
early '80s, I think. I'll look it up.
82, I want to
Okay.
say.
Is that Dawn?
Mhm.
Yeah, Don Bluth.
So it seems
That's
like,
probably Don Bluth's best movie I think that's his
Mhm.
greatest achievement, honestly.
and it seems like while Disney
Yeah,
was trying to
82.
figure itself out, enter Dawn with American Tail. We had
Yeah.
American Tail, and what else was it?
Land Before Time.
Well, and
Night Before
Yeah,
Time,
that-
Secret of
that's-
Nim.
That was my movie.
And then the kind of like the last of his like big hits, I would say, would be All Dogs Go to Heaven.
So it's weird. It's almost like really those were my first animated movies that I remember. I don't
Mhm.
like. I definitely watched Cinderella, the classics, with my parents via tape. But as far as going to the movie theater, it was The Land Before Time. That.
Well, I think Disney was just doing sort of only maybe one movie a year, right? Maybe
Yeah.
maybe even every
Not in
other
the
as
80s.
animated. I mean, they were
But-
doing live action stuff, but I mean, there was lots of other studios doing cartoon movies
Mhm.
in the '80s. You had so many just kind of popping them out, to kind of because again, the demand was there.
Do you think?
Yeah,
Go
I was going to say, and Disney at that time was also just re-releasing old movies. Like I remember seeing as a kid Fantasia on the big screen and The Jungle Book on the big screen. So they were banking on their, library.
I want to say 86 was the last time Song of the South was released in theaters, or around 86.
Mhm.
Speaking of that, I wonder how that relates to today too, where now a lot of what Disney's doing is just putting out live action versions of their 90s movies. And it's like I wonder if they're having that same issue with coming up with new content and just being like, well, let's bank on some of the hits that we had previously by trying to freshen it up a little bit. But yeah.
I saw a document, an article about the 9 phases of Disney, and about how they've had several different dark ages. So there was definitely one after Fantasia, a little like during the war years when, and gosh, I can't even think of those movies. It was like the Three Amigos. There was a whole bunch of
Three Caballeros.
Caballeros.
Merry Melody Time, I want to say.
That's considered
then-
the dark age.
Yeah, it was.
And then they realized they had to bring back the princess. They went back to the formula of the princess movie, and then so enter Cinderella. And then
I would kind of argue just before Cinderella, you kind of had a little lead into resurgence with Mr. Wild Adventures of Mr. Toad and Ichabod.
Right. It seems like they do always go back to, at least the original Snow White format for a reboot. I think personally we are entering another dark age when they try to recycle some things. I'm getting into more theory. I don't have any facts to that, but it seems like whenever Disney is going through a changeover and above, and they're definitely doing that right now.
Yeah.
They usually just throw everything at the wall to figure out what's next.
Yeah,
I saw Aladdin, the live action remake, and I know that got a lot of mixed reviews from people. Personally, I thought it was funny, and I thought it was I thought it was a good adaptation that I enjoyed watching. And then I saw The Lion King, and I mean, like, it was good insofar as the original was good, but I feel like the Aladdin movie, like, it wasn't the exact retelling of the original Aladdin with live action characters, but I felt like for the Lion King movie, it was basically almost verbatim the original movie, just with live action characters. And I was walking into the Lion King thinking it was going to be like Aladdin and be like, all right, well, they're going to change up some things. It's going to be a little bit different. And I was like, this is the exact same movie.
I kind of feel like with the live action ones, they're kind of doing, it depends upon who the director they hire.
Yeah, I was thinking that too, because I think it was Guy Ritchie that did Aladdin, right?
Yeah.
Which is strange because nothing feels like Guy Ritchie in that movie. You think like, all right, he's done all these crime movies and, these streetwise, people. That's perfect for Aladdin. And then the most Guy Ritchie thing he does is when Aladdin's doing his parkour, jumping up a building. And like everything else is so standard in a weird way that by the end I was like, that could have been anybody. Like, that's not a Guy Ritchie movie. That's just his name's on it.
That's the modern world, though. Like, the director doesn't bring a vision really anymore, because you've got Disney/Marvel in some cases too. Like, they just need a product that fits these beats. It can't be any less than a B+ movie. This has to be in it, and we got to sell these toys, and that's it. Really, the director is just another person to go on, the Today Show or whatever, or the Tonight Show or something to hype the movie. Like, that's really all the director serves now, it seems, because you don't see those fingerprints anymore. And then people with like integrity end up walking away, like when Edgar Wright walked away from Ant-Man. That would have been a crazy movie to see. But yeah, it's too restrictive in some ways for these people that have a lot of big ideas, and so they just take the check and make the okay movie and go home. I
mean, Tim Burton kind of put his own fingerprint on Dumbo. He just remade Big Fish.
Basically. Now, that criticism aside, I'm okay with remakes because, well, first off, we're talking about fairy tales, and I think fairy tales have been with us for like centuries. I think
they're supposed to be retold.
Yeah, retold for each new generation to get into the whole story. So when my kids watch Aladdin, the live action version, that makes them actually want to go back to the old 1992 version and watch that. So it creates an intergenerational moment, just like how cable television created an intergenerational moment between us and our parents' Hanna-Barbera cartoons. Just bringing things full circle. So I'm okay with remakes to a certain extent.
I was just gonna say, really quickly, I have to admit that I'm a Guy Ritchie fan. I know that will probably have a lot of people question my taste, but I was gonna say, in one respect, that I felt like I saw some of the Guy Ritchie-esqueness shine through in the movie, was that I think that he's pretty good at making lighthearted jokes and bring a comedic element to a lot of his movies, and I thought that Aladdin was pretty funny, and I thought that probably I can't really remember thinking that the first one was that funny, but I thought I was imagining that Guy Ritchie probably had an influence in how funny I thought this new one was, because I did laugh quite a bit in this new one. I can't remember the exact scene, but there was one part.
The dance scene.
Just got to call you out on saying the first movie with Robin Williams was not funny. From what you remember,
yeah.
I got
this.
The dance scene, the scene with they were in the ballroom or something like that with Aladdin, and he didn't really know how to approach Jasmine, so Genie kind of pushed him that way, almost like he was a dating coach. Going back to another Will Smith show, there was a movie. There was a
Hitch.
Yeah, it felt like he played Hitch.
Oh yeah.
The Genie version of Hitch. But I mean, that was a nice little modern joke. Maybe was that a Guy Ritchie touch?
Maybe. I remember, I think the part that I was laughing the hardest at was like, there was a scene, and I can't remember the specifics, but there was outside of Jasmine's room, and then it involved in Jasmine's room. And I'm like, that wasn't really ever, like, that was a completely new scene for the movie.
Okay.
And I thought that it was hilarious. And I wish I could remember what it was.
I was going to say, I feel like the biggest Guy Ritchie moment was erasing the giant snake that Jafar turns into at the end of the movie.
That bothered
because he just did a giant snake at the end of King Arthur. So I have a feeling that he came on board and was like, you know what, I've already done a giant snake in the climax of my movie, so let's do a giant parrot instead. And I think the climax of the film suffers if you compare it to the original animated film, which just has such a great, it's like a great textbook example of building tension between Princess Jasmine's like gonna suffocate in the sand in the hourglass, and Raja's been turned into a cub, and the flying carpet's been turned into a pile of yarn. Like, it just keeps building, like this odds are stacked against Aladdin, the giant snakes curling around him. And in the live action movie, Jafar makes the princess float in the air, and like you don't see everyone else get handcuffed in the same way. And that
I agree with that. Yeah, it felt like a bit anticlimactic, the ending. It felt like it got there and then it went much quicker, and the tension wasn't there in the original. I definitely agree with that. And
I think it's because Guy Ritchie was like, I don't want to do a giant snake again because I just did one. And I think that could have been a reason for that sort of rewrite.
I think going off of what we were talking about, playing into Will Smith as Hitch, kind of modern joke that Guy Ritchie might have put in there is, if you really start to think about it, Aladdin, as Disney is all centered around who you have playing as the genie. Aladdin and Jasmine, at least in the animated one, are a little bit more bland. Yes, they have some personalities, but the real big focus, even in the marketing, which was one of the reasons why Robin Williams sued Disney, was because the animators were going wild with creativity off of what Robin Williams was doing in the studio. So I think tooling, whenever you readapt at least the Disney telling of Aladdin, focusing on playing to the strengths of whoever is playing the genie is probably going to be a critical thing in any kind of future readaptation.